Dr. Jake Morrison stood before the massive curved wall of screens that surrounded the central platform of Nexus Prime. The alien research station hung in space like a giant metal flower, its petals opening toward the stars. Through the transparent walls, he could see the swirling clouds of the gas giant below and the tiny specks of Federation ships moving between the orbital platforms. The Galactic Council of Sciences had gathered to hear his presentation about human mythology. Jake had spent 3 years preparing this moment, collecting stories from every human colony and analyzing the patterns that ran through all of Earth's ancient tales. He believed these stories held important secrets about humanity's place in the galaxy. Commander Vextar of the Cathari sat in the front row, his forearms crossed over his armored chest. The warrior species had always looked down on humans as weak creatures who needed stories to make themselves feel brave. Behind him, the crystalline form of Dr. Qualmish caught the station's artificial light, the Zephyrian's logical mind already dismissing what Jake was about to say. The ancient Vorthan scholars floated in their hover chairs, their massive heads nodding with what looked like patience, but Jake knew was barely hidden boredom. The Neph collective shared thoughts silently among themselves, their large black eyes reflecting no emotion at all. Jake activated his first hologram, showing images of Greek gods, Norse warriors, and Hindu deities. Honored colleagues, human. Mythology appears to be random stories about impossible beings. But when we look deeper, we find patterns that exist across all human cultures, even those that never had contact with each other. A ripple of amusement passed through the alien audience. Commander Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Dr. Morrison, surely you do not expect us to believe that your primitive ancestors were visited by actual gods. These are clearly the fantasies of minds that could not understand the natural world around them. Dr. Qualmish's voice rang like crystal bells. The Zephyrian analysis of human psychological development shows that mythology serves as a coping mechanism for species that have not yet developed proper scientific understanding. Your people created these stories because reality was too frightening to face without imaginary protectors. Jake felt his face grow warm, but kept his voice steady. With respect, these stories share details that suggest they might be based on real events. The descriptions of divine weapons match theoretical physics models for matter manipulation. The accounts of gods traveling between worlds describe technologies we're only beginning to understand. The Vorthan elder Morthic spoke in his deep, ancient voice. Young human, we have studied the rise and fall of 10,000 civilizations. Every species creates myths about powerful beings who will save them from danger. It is a universal phase of cultural development that most species outgrow. Jake moved to his next display, showing energy readings that his research partner Dr. Lisa Carter had discovered. These are quantum signatures detected at Earth's ancient mythological sites. Stonehenge, Mount Olympus, the pyramids of Giza. Energy patterns don't match anything in Federation databases. The Neph collective spoke in unison, their shared consciousness delivering judgment. Equipment malfunction is the most logical explanation. Human technology is known to produce false readings when operated near certain mineral deposits. Your mythology sites were chosen for their dramatic appearance, not their energy properties. Lisa stepped forward from where she had been monitoring the sensor displays. Her face was pale and her hands shook slightly as she held up a data pad. Jake, I'm getting new readings. Something is happening at the edge of our sensor range. The main display shifted to show the dark space beyond the galaxy's rim. A faint signal pulsed in the emptiness, growing stronger with each wave. The Federation's most advanced computers tried to decode the transmission, but failed completely. Jake listened to the static-filled broadcast and felt his blood run cold. Hidden within the electronic noise, he could hear fragments of words in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. Ancient Greek phrases about awakening titans. Norse words describing the end of the world. Sanskrit chants that spoke of divine weapons returning to protect the innocent. This is impossible. Dr. Quamsha's logical mind struggled to process what the sensors were showing. No one speaks those languages anymore. They have been extinct for millennia. Commander Vexstar stood up, his warrior instincts finally taking the situation seriously. Dr. Morrison, can you translate this transmission? Jake nodded slowly, his knowledge of ancient human languages suddenly feeling more important than any. Scientific degree. Someone or something is calling to Earth in the old tongues. They're saying that the time of stories is ending, and the time of truth is beginning. The alien council members looked at each other with confusion and the first hints of concern. These beings who had conquered space and bent physics to their will suddenly found themselves faced with something their science could not explain. The transmission grew louder and clearer, filling the station with voices that seemed to come from the spaces between stars. Jake realized that everything he had tried to tell them about human mythology was about to become terrifyingly real. 3 months had passed since the mysterious transmission from deep space, and Captain Ben Rodriguez knew the galaxy had changed in ways that made no sense. His ship, the Aurora, cut through space toward Kepler 442b, where impossible things were happening to human colonists. The first reports had seemed like jokes or mass hallucinations. Farmers on distant worlds claimed to see massive figures walking through storms, beings that looked like the ancient Greek titans from Earth's oldest stories. Federation Command had sent psychologists and doctors, thinking the isolated colonists were suffering from some new form of space madness. And the footage arrived. Ben watched the recordings again as his ship approached the troubled colony. The security cameras showed a storm unlike anything in the weather databases, with lightning that moved in perfect spirals and clouds that formed impossible geometric shapes. Through the chaos walked a figure that stood 3 times taller than any human, carrying what could only be described as a hammer that glowed with its own inner fire. Science. Officer Zeftal stood beside him on the bridge, the Zephyrian's crystalline form reflecting the light from the screens. 3 months ago, Zeftal had laughed at human mythology. Now the logical alien watched the impossible footage with growing confusion. Captain, my analysis indicates this cannot be real. The energy requirements for manipulating weather patterns of this magnitude would require technology beyond anything in Federation databases. Yet the visual evidence is undeniable. Tactical Officer Morgan, a Cathari warrior who had once mocked human stories of divine protectors, studied the tactical displays with new respect. The entity appears to be defending the human settlement. Notice how the storm damages everything except the colony buildings. This suggests intelligence and purpose, not random natural phenomena. Ben nodded grimly. The reports were coming in from all over human space now. Beings that matched descriptions from Earth's ancient myths were appearing wherever humans faced danger. The logical aliens of the Federation had no explanation for how stories were becoming reality. On Earth itself, Dr. Amy Patterson was experiencing the changes more directly than anyone in space. The mythology professor at Cambridge had always loved the old stories, but now they were invading her dreams with frightening intensity. Each night brought visions of ancient places and forgotten rituals that felt more like memories than imagination. She was not alone. Around the world, archaeologists were dreaming of dig sites they had never visited. Historians found themselves speaking in ancient languages they had never learned. Even children who barely knew the old stories were drawing pictures of gods and monsters with details that matched archaeological discoveries. Amy sat in her office, surrounded by emails and video calls from colleagues around the globe. Dr. Peter Chun in Beijing reported that his students were experiencing collective dreams about Chinese dragons. Professor Maria Santos in Mexico City said her archaeology team was having visions of Aztec gods that included information not found in any textbook. It's as if the stories are trying to remember themselves through us. Amy told her video conference with researchers from 6 continents. Something is using human minds as a network to bring these ancient patterns back to life. Back on Nexus Prime, Jake Morrison worked around the clock with Federation scientists who no longer dismissed his research as primitive nonsense. The energy readings that Lisa Carter had detected were growing stronger every day. Ancient sites across human-settled worlds were beginning to resonate with patterns that defied every law of physics the Federation understood. Lisa burst into the research lab where Jake was comparing mythological texts with energy signatures. Her face was flushed with excitement and fear. "Jake, you need to see this. The quantum signatures aren't random. They're forming a network that spans the entire galaxy, using human colonies as connection points." The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of human space with glowing lines connecting every settlement. The pattern looked organic, like the nervous system of some vast living creature. Each pulse of energy that traveled along the connections seemed to strengthen the network. Dr. Qualmish floated nearby, the Zephyrian's logical mind struggling to accept what the data clearly showed. This suggests that human expansion across the galaxy was not random exploration, but followed a predetermined pattern, as if your species was unconsciously building some kind of defensive array. Commander Vextar had arrived on the station that morning, his forearms carrying data pads filled with reports from Cathari military units. The proud warrior species was filing formal requests to be stationed alongside human colonies, hoping to witness more appearances of the mythological defenders. "My warriors have fought beside your Greek heroes on 3 different worlds," Vextar told Jake with something approaching reverence. "Beings that can summon lightning and split mountains with their bare hands. My people no longer question the reality of your gods." The breakthrough came when the Federation's most advanced sensors detected movement in the deep space beyond the galactic rim. The massive structures that had been dormant for eons were beginning to show signs of activity. Whatever was sleeping out there in the darkness between galaxies was starting to wake up. Jake stood before the main display as the long-range scanners struggled to process what they were seeing. The objects were huge beyond comprehension, each one the size of a small moon, but clearly artificial. They had been drifting in the void for so long that space dust had formed clouds around them, but now energy was flowing through systems that had been dark for millions of years. The transmission came without warning, broadcast on frequencies that should have been impossible to access. The voice spoke in perfect galactic standard, but Jake recognized the accent from his studies of ancient Earth languages. "Greetings, children of the young races. I am called Odin in your human tongues, though I have worn many names across the long ages. The old powers wake because they are needed. What you call myth, we call memory. And humanity will need every legend they ever told before this is over." The holographic figure that appeared before the assembled Federation representatives was unmistakably the Norse All-Father from human mythology, one-eyed and wearing a cloak that seemed to contain the darkness between stars. He looked upon the aliens who had mocked human stories with something that might have been amusement. "The enemy stirs beyond the rim of your galaxy. Ancient things that hunger for more than matter and energy. They devour concepts themselves, unmaking civilizations so completely that even memory of them ceases to exist. Your weapons of science will be useless against them. Only the weapons of story and belief can harm what should not be." The transmission ended, leaving the Federation leaders staring at empty space, where a mythological god had just delivered a warning about the end of everything they knew. Dr. Charlie Brooks had always believed that consciousness was just electrical patterns in biological brains. But the data flowing across his screens was forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about reality. The quantum physicist sat in his lab aboard Nexus Prime, surrounded by readings that showed human thoughts somehow affecting the fundamental structure of space itself. "Jake, look at this," Charlie called to his colleague, who was studying ancient Norse texts in the corner of the lab. "The quantum fluctuations around human colonies spike every time someone tells a mythological story. It's as if belief itself is generating measurable energy in real space." Jake looked up from his translation of the Poetic Edda, his mind still processing the implications of Odin's warning. "Charlie, what if consciousness isn't just an observer of reality, but an active participant in creating it? What if human mythology wasn't just stories, but a form of collective programming that actually built these entities through focused belief across thousands of years?" The answer came from an unexpected source. On the frontier world of New Valhalla, Norse gods had begun appearing to help human settlers fight off attacks from something the colonists were calling void hunters. The creatures seemed to be made of living darkness that consumed light and matter wherever they touched. Captain Ben Rodriguez received the distress call while his ship was still 3 days away from the embattled colony. The message from Colony Administrator Helen Parker was filled with impossible claims about warriors with golden armor fighting monsters that ate starlight. "Captain, Federation Command has dispatched a full battle fleet to assist New Valhalla," Communications Officer Tony Williams reported from his station. "Admiral Clark's task force includes our most advanced warships and experimental weapon systems." Ben studied the tactical reports as they arrived from the battle zone. Admiral Clark's fleet had engaged the Void Hunters with every weapon in the Federation arsenal. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and antimatter missiles had all been deployed against the dark creatures with absolutely no effect. The beings seemed to absorb energy attacks and use them to grow larger. Kinetic weapons passed through them without causing damage. Even the Federation's most classified experimental weapons, designed to disrupt exotic matter, had proven completely useless. Then the footage arrived from the planet's surface, showing something that made every scientist and military officer question their understanding of the universe. A woman in golden armor, carrying a spear that blazed with its own inner fire, was fighting the Void Hunters with devastating effectiveness. Each thrust of her weapon tore holes in the dark creatures that sealed themselves with screams that registered on audio equipment as sounds that should not exist. Ben recognized her immediately from his childhood study of Earth mythology. Freya, the Norse goddess of war and love, was defending human colonists with weapons that could harm beings impervious to every advanced technology the Federation possessed. The goddess appeared to Ben personally as his ship entered the New Valhalla system. One moment he was standing alone on the bridge. The next moment she was there, her presence filling the command center with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of distant thunder. "Captain Rodriguez," Freya spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your people wonder how stories became real. The truth is simpler than your scientists believe. We were always real. Your myths were not creations, but memories of an ancient compact between humanity and the powers that guard the spaces between worlds." Ben found his voice, despite the impossibility of talking to a mythological figure. "Goddess, what are these?" "Void Hunters. Why can't our weapons harm them?" Freya gestured toward the main screen, where the dark creatures writhed through space like living oil spills. "They are scouts for something far worse. Ancient enemies that sleep in the spaces between galaxies. They consume not just matter and energy, but concepts themselves. They can unmake civilizations so completely that even the idea of those civilizations ceases to exist." The explanation continued as more Norse entities manifested throughout human space. Thor appeared to defend mining colonies, wielding his hammer against creatures that could not be harmed by any physical force. Loki materialized to help evacuate civilians using transportation methods that bypassed normal space entirely. Each appearance was witnessed by Federation observers who documented the impossible with growing amazement. The proud Cathari warriors began requesting permission to fight alongside the Norse gods, finally recognizing beings worthy of their respect. The logical Zephyrians suffered mental breakdowns trying to reconcile their understanding of physics with deities who casually violated every natural law. Dr. Lisa Carter made the crucial discovery while analyzing the energy patterns around New Valhalla. The ancient signatures she had detected at Earth's mythological sites were not random, but formed a galaxy-spanning network with human colonies serving as nodes. Each manifestation of a mythological entity strengthened the connections between settlements. "Jake, the pattern is becoming clear," Lisa announced during an emergency conference with Federation Command. Human expansion across the galaxy wasn't just exploration. We were unconsciously following a predetermined design, building a defensive array that spans thousands of light years. The revelation came from Odin himself when he manifested before the assembled Federation leaders. The one-eyed god appeared. In the main council chamber of Nexus Prime, his ravens perched on the backs of alien chairs as if they belonged there. Children of the young races, Odin addressed the aliens who had once mocked human mythology. Your ancestors fought this enemy before, in ages when the galaxy was young. They failed because they trusted only in their technology and science. We are the living memory of what must be done when science is not enough. Commander Vextar knelt before the Norse god, his warrior pride overcome by recognition of a being who had fought battles beyond imagination. "Great Odin, what must we do to survive what is coming?" A god's single eye fixed on each alien representative. "In turn, you must learn to believe, not in us, but in the power of story itself. The enemy approaches in force, and only myths made manifest can stand against them. Your people must embrace what they once called primitive, if any of you wish to see another dawn." Deep space sensors began detecting movement along the galactic rim. The structures that had been dormant for eons were not just awakening but moving, approaching the galaxy with purpose and intelligence. Whatever was coming had waited millions of years for this moment. Jake Morrison stood beside gods and aliens, watching long-range displays show the approach of something that defied every category of threat the Federation had ever encountered. The time for studying mythology was ending. A time for living, it was about to begin. The ancient structures had been moving toward the galaxy for weeks, when long-range scanners finally revealed their true nature. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Federation flagship, watching displays that showed objects the size of moons approaching at impossible speeds. The biomechanical entities pulsed with dark energy that seemed to absorb light itself. "Analysis complete, Commander," Science Officer Kate Sullivan reported from her station. "The structures are not ships in any conventional sense. They appear to be living entities that have converted matter into extensions of themselves. Each one contains what can only be described as cosmic parasites that feed on concepts rather than physical matter." Alina studied the tactical readouts with growing horror. The beings approaching the galaxy were not just large, but operated according to principles that made conventional warfare meaningless. They could consume the very idea of damage, making weapons useless not because they bounced off armor, but because the concept of harm simply ceased to exist in their presence. The first contact battle took place at the edge of the Outer Rim territories, where a Federation patrol fleet encountered a single scout entity. Admiral Robert Hayes commanded 12 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, each one armed with weapons capable of cracking planets. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. The Devourer, as the Federation quickly learned to call them, did not destroy the Federation ships in any traditional sense. It consumed the concept of their existence, leaving behind empty space where 12 warships and 3,000 crew members had been moments before. No wreckage, no energy signatures, no trace that they had ever existed except for the gaps in the communication logs. Elena received the report while leading a joint task force that included both Federation vessels and the Norse entities that had manifested throughout human space. Zeus himself stood on her bridge, the Greek god's presence filling the command center with the scent of ozone and the rumble of distant thunder. Honored Zeus, Helena addressed the king of the Olympian gods with a respect that would have seemed impossible months before. Our conventional weapons cannot even register these entities as targets. How do beings of myth fight something that can erase the concept of battle itself? Zeus gestured toward the main display where the approaching devourers pulsed with dark energy. Commander, these ancient enemies once consumed entire galaxies, leaving behind not just dead space, but void so complete that no memory remained of what had been lost. They devour civilizations by unmaking the very ideas that hold them together. The revelation came in fragments as more mythological entities manifested to explain the true scope of the threat. Thor appeared aboard Cathari warships, teaching alien warriors how to fight beings that existed partially outside normal reality. Athena materialized in Federation research centers, sharing tactical knowledge that predated known history. Dr. Steve Williams, a psychologist who had been studying the mythological manifestations, made the connection that changed everything. He realized that the strength of each entity depended directly on how many people believed in them and how deeply those beliefs ran through their cultures. Elena, we've been thinking about this wrong, Steve announced during an emergency strategy meeting. The gods and heroes aren't separate from us. They're powered by collective human consciousness. The more people who know their stories and believe in their power, the stronger they become in physical reality. This led to the most desperate plan in galactic history. Federation Command authorized the immediate distribution of human mythology to every world in their territory. Alien children who had never heard of Earth began learning stories of Hercules, Sun Wukong, and Gilgamesh alongside their own cultural legends. Commander, Vexstar led the Cathari effort to spread human myths throughout. Warrior culture. The proud aliens who had once mocked human stories now taught their young about Norse berserkers and Greek heroes. If these stories can manifest beings capable of harming the devourers, then we will make our children believe in them as if their lives depend on it, the Cathari leader declared. The Zephyrian response was more complex. Their logical minds struggled with the concept of belief overriding reality, but their survival instincts ultimately won. They Quamish began developing mathematical proofs that showed how consciousness could affect quantum probability fields, giving the crystalline beings a scientific framework for accepting the impossible. The first major battle occurred when a full Devourer assault fleet reached the Outer Rim colonies. The Federation task force that responded included vessels crewed by both aliens and manifestations of human heroes. Elena commanded from the bridge of her flagship, while Ares, the Greek god of war, coordinated tactical movements that defied every principle of space combat. The battle revealed the true horror of fighting the Devourers. When conventional weapons fired at the entities, the concept of the attack simply vanished before impact could occur. The Devourers could unmake the idea of damage itself, leaving Federation gunners pulling triggers on weapons that no longer had any meaning. But the mythological entities could harm them. When Thor threw his hammer at a Devourer, the weapon carried the concentrated belief of billions of humans who had heard his story. The impact tore through the entity's conceptual defenses because the myth of Thor was stronger than the Devourers' ability to unmake it. The Devourers responded by manifesting corrupted versions of destroyed civilizations. Ancient heroes from species that had been completely erased millions of years ago, appeared as twisted shadows to fight against humanity's myths. The battle became a war of stories, with archetypal forces clashing in space while reality itself hung in the balance. Helena watched from her command center as Achilles dueled with the spectral champion of a race whose very name had been consumed by the Devourers. The Greek hero's spear blazed with the belief of every human who had ever heard the Iliad, while his opponent wielded weapons forged from the dying memories of a civilization that no longer existed. The tide began to turn when alien species started contributing their own mythologies to the defense network. Cathari war spirits manifested alongside Norse berserkers. Zephyrian probability shapers bent reality using mathematical incantations. Vorthan ancestor minds shared tactical wisdom across the psychic battlefield. But the true breakthrough came when Dr. Lisa Carter discovered that some human myths contained detailed information about fighting the Devourers, tactical knowledge that could only have come from previous conflicts. The ancient stories were not just entertainment, but historical records disguised as legends, passed down through generations to prepare humanity for this exact moment. As the battle raged across multiple star systems, Elena realized that everything humanity had ever believed about their place in the galaxy was wrong. They were not primitive newcomers, but the inheritors of an ancient duty. Every story they had ever told, every hero they had ever imagined, had been preparation for the war that was now upon them. The Devourers pressed their attack toward the core worlds, but now they faced an enemy they had not encountered in millions of years. An entire galaxy united by shared stories, defended by beings born from collective belief, ready to fight for the right of consciousness to create meaning in an empty universe. 6 months into the war, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable from the ordered Federation territories that had existed before the Devourers arrived. Captain Ryan Thompson commanded one of the new hybrid vessels that blended Federation technology with mythological enhancements, his ship crackling with energies that would have been impossible to explain using conventional physics. The Asgards. Dream flew through space powered by engines blessed by Hephaestus and protected by hull plating forged in the fires of Mount Olympus. Ryan's crew included both Federation officers and manifestations of human heroes, creating a command structure that required constant adaptation to beings who operated by different rules than military protocol. Captain, we're receiving distress signals from the Kepler 438 system. Communications Officer Danny Walsh reported from his station. 3 Devourer entities have begun consuming the colony's cultural centers. They're targeting schools and libraries specifically. Ryan nodded grimly. The Devourers had adapted their tactics after their initial defeats, learning that direct assault on mythological defenders was less effective than attacking the sources of belief that powered them. By destroying places where stories were told, and remembered, they could weaken the manifestations that opposed them. Set course for Kepler 438, Ryan ordered. Signal the Perseus wing to join us. We'll need both Greek and Norse support for this operation. The battle for Kepler 438 became typical of the new kind of warfare that had emerged across the galaxy. The Devourers no longer tried to simply consume matter and energy, but focused on erasing specific concepts that held civilizations together. They targeted the idea of courage, hoping to unmake the heroes that defended against them. Ryan watched from his bridge as Heracles led a boarding party onto a Devourer entity. The Greek hero's strength, powered by every human child who had ever heard his stories. The Devourer tried to consume the concept of heroism itself, but the myth was too deeply embedded in galactic consciousness to be erased. The alien species had contributed their own legends to the defense network, creating unexpected hybrid entities that combined human archetypes with alien cultural elements. A Cathari war spirit merged with the Norse concept of berserker. Rage produced warriors who could fight in the spaces between dimensions. Zephyrian probability shapers working with Greek fate goddesses created tactical advantages that defied causality. Itself, Dr. Kate Sullivan worked aboard the research vessel Newton's Dream, studying how the mixing of mythologies was creating entirely new forms of reality manipulation. Her team included scholars from 12 different species, all frantically documenting how stories were becoming living weapons in the war for existence itself. The fusion is accelerating, Kate reported during a conference with Federation Command. Human children on Vorthan worlds are creating stories that combine Earth mythology with ancient Vorthan ancestor worship. These hybrid tales are manifesting entities we've never seen before, beings that seem designed specifically to fight conceptual warfare. The Devourers responded by deploying their most terrifying weapon. They began manifesting corrupted versions of destroyed civilization's greatest champions, warriors and heroes from species that had been so completely erased that only the Devourers remembered they had ever existed. These shadow heroes fought with the desperate fury of beings trying to prove their cultures had once mattered. Captain Ben Rodriguez encountered one of these entities during the defense of New Athens. The shadow warrior spoke in a language that translation computers could not process, because the linguistic concepts it represented no longer existed anywhere in the universe. It fought with weapons forged from the dying memories of its people, each strike carrying the weight of an entire civilization's final moments. "This is wrong," Ben told the Norse god Tyr, who stood beside him on the bridge. "These beings are victims too. The Devourers are using the ghosts of their previous conquests as weapons against us." Tyr nodded, his single hand gripping his sword, with grim understanding. "The enemy has always been cruel in this way. They preserve fragments of what they destroy, not out of mercy, but to use as tools against future victims. These shadow champions know they are already dead. They fight because it is the only way they can still exist." The breakthrough came when Dr. Amy Patterson, working with alien xenopsychologists, discovered that the shadow heroes retained enough consciousness to be reasoned with. On Earth, teams of mythologists and linguists began developing communication protocols that could reach across the conceptual barriers the Devourers had erected. The first successful contact occurred during the battle for the Centauri system. A shadow warrior from a civilization that had been destroyed 50 million years ago found itself face to face with Achilles during a boarding action. Instead of fighting, the Greek hero offered his hand in alliance, the shadow champion's response. Translated roughly as, "We remember honor, even in death. Will you help us find rest?" The alliance between human mythological entities and the shadow heroes of destroyed civilizations changed the nature of the war. The Devourers found their own weapons turning against them as ancient champions remembered what they had originally fought to protect. Beings that had been enslaved for millions of years began breaking free from conceptual chains. Major Alex Carter led Federation Marines in the ground defense of Earth's mythological sites, which had become literal gateways where gods and heroes emerged into physical reality. The battle for Mount Olympus saw Greek deities fighting alongside Federation soldiers and freed shadow champions in a conflict that spanned multiple planes of existence simultaneously. "The Devourers are adapting again," Alex reported to his brother Jake during a brief lull in the fighting. "They're trying to consume the concept of liberation itself. If they succeed, none of the shadow champions will be able to break free from their control." Jake worked frantically with teams of mythologists and quantum physicists to develop countermeasures. They realized that the Devourers' greatest weakness was their inability to understand cooperation between different forms of consciousness. The entities had spent so long consuming isolated civilizations that they could not comprehend species working together. The war reached a turning point when children across the galaxy began spontaneously creating new myths that combined elements from every culture they had encountered. A human child on a Cathari world might tell a story about a Norse god learning honor from an alien warrior. A young Zephyrian might calculate the probability of hope itself. Turning mathematics into mythology, these new stories began manifesting as entities that represented the best qualities of galactic civilization. Beings appeared that embodied courage shared across species lines, wisdom that transcended cultural boundaries, and hope that refused to be consumed by despair. Dr. Steve Williams documented the phenomenon from his research station near Earth. We're watching the birth of truly galactic mythology. Stories that belong to all of us, not just humans. The Devourers can't consume these new myths because they're too complex, too interconnected across too many different forms of consciousness. The Devourers pressed their assault toward the core worlds, but now they faced something they had never encountered in millions of years of conquest. An entire galaxy united not just by military alliance, but by shared stories, defended by beings born from collective belief that transcended species boundaries. As the war intensified, everyone involved began to understand that they were fighting for more than survival. They were defending the right of consciousness to create meaning, to tell stories, and to believe in something greater than the cold emptiness between stars. The final battle began when the Devourers brought their ultimate weapon to bear against Earth itself, attempting to erase the concept of heroism at its source. Major Alex Carter stood on the steps of the Parthenon as reality warped around him, watching gods and monsters clash in skies that flickered between dimensions. Devourers had learned that destroying individual heroes was pointless when new ones could be born from shared stories. Instead, they focused their assault on the fundamental concepts that made heroism possible. If they could consume the idea of courage itself, every mythological defender would simply cease to exist. Alex led Federation Marines and alien volunteers in the ground defense of Earth's mythological sites, which had become literal anchor points holding reality together. Mount Olympus blazed with divine fire as Greek gods fought beings that existed partially outside normal space. Stonehenge pulsed with energies that connected to every human colony across the galaxy, each pulse carrying the beliefs of billions of people. Dr. Rachel Morgan worked frantically in the improvised command center beneath the British Museum, coordinating with mythological entities who operated by rules that defied every scientific principle. Her screens showed the battle raging across multiple planes of existence simultaneously, with heroes from every human culture united in desperate defense. The Devourers are winning, Rachel reported to the Emergency Council that included both Federation leaders and manifestations of humanity's greatest legends. They're successfully consuming the concept of individual heroism. Our defenders are beginning to fade as the idea of heroes loses coherence. Odin stood at the center of the council chamber, his ravens perched on equipment that blended Federation technology with mythological enhancements. The Norse god's single eye reflected wisdom gathered across eons of similar battles. The enemy makes the same mistake they have always made. They believe that heroism comes from individuals rather than from the connections between all conscious beings. The breakthrough came when Dr. Amy Patterson realized that the Devourers could consume specific concepts, but not the act of creation itself. As long as conscious beings continued to imagine new stories, new hopes, and new dreams, the enemy could never achieve total victory. Everyone listen to me, Amy broadcast across all Federation channels and mythological communication networks. The Devourers can destroy what exists, but they cannot stop us from creating something new. We need to tell stories that have never been told before. Imagine heroes that combine everything we've learned about working together. The response was immediate and unprecedented. Human children on distant colonies began creating tales that included every species they had met. Alien. Youngsters who had learned Earth's ancient myths started imagining new gods that belonged to all of them. Even adult scientists and soldiers found themselves contributing to stories that grew more complex with each retelling. Captain Ben Rodriguez, watched from the bridge of his ship as the new mythology began to manifest in real space. Beings appeared that embodied cooperation between species, entities that represented shared courage rather than individual heroism. A figure that looked like Zeus, but spoke with the wisdom of Vorthan elders, wielded lightning that had been blessed by Cathari. Honor-spirits. The Devourers found themselves facing something they had never encountered in millions of years of conquest. Instead of isolated mythologies that could be consumed one at a time, they confronted a living network of interconnected stories that grew stronger each time it was attacked. Jake Morrison stood in the rebuilt Nexus Prime Command Center, watching displays that showed the tide of battle turning across the galaxy. The energy readings that his partner Lisa Carter had first detected years ago now formed a complete network connecting every conscious being in Federation space. Each story told, each act of courage witnessed, each moment of hope shared sent, power flowing through the system. The network is stabilizing, Lisa announced from her monitoring station. The new mythological entities are drawing power from the entire galactic population. The Devourers can't consume them because they're not individual beings, but living representations of our collective imagination. The climax occurred when humanity's greatest mythological figures, led by beings like Odin and Zeus, performed a ritual that transformed the entire galactic population into active participants in the defense network. Every person became both audience and author of the stories that protected reality itself. Commander Elena Vasquez felt the change as it swept across her ship and crew. Suddenly, every Federation officer could sense the mythological entities as clearly as their own heartbeats. Alien crew members found themselves contributing to human legends, while humans helped strengthen the stories of other species. The Devourers made their final assault on Earth, bringing entities the size of moons to consume the whole world of mythology itself, but they found themselves unable to complete their task because Earth was no longer just a planet, but an idea that existed in the hearts and minds of beings across the galaxy. Thor's hammer struck not just the Devourer threatening Earth, but the concept of despair itself. Athena's spear pierced through dimensional barriers to wound the idea of hopelessness. Heroes from every human culture and their alien allies fought, not just for survival, but for the right of consciousness to create meaning in an empty universe. Devourers were not destroyed because beings of their nature could not truly die. Instead, they were contained within conceptual prisons made of pure story, trapped in recursive narratives where they could never achieve their goal of consuming everything because the act of consumption created new tales about resistance and survival. Dr. Charlie Brooks documented the aftermath from his laboratory, which now existed simultaneously in normal space and in the realm of living stories. The Devourers are locked in permanent defeat because every time they try to consume something, that act of consumption becomes a new story about beings who fought back. They've become part of the mythology they tried to destroy. The war ended, not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The Federation became the narrative alliance where cultural ambassadors held positions as important as military commanders. Species that had once viewed each other as alien now shared stories that connected them across the vast distances of space. Humanity, once mocked for their primitive attachment to ancient tales, found themselves revered as the galaxy's mythkeepers. They had saved reality itself by proving that stories mattered more than science when existence itself was at stake. Jake Morrison gave his final presentation to the Reformed Galactic Council in the same chamber where aliens had once laughed at human mythology. This time, when he spoke of the power of belief and the reality of ancient stories, representatives from dozens of species listened with the reverence due to those who had preserved consciousness itself. The new galaxy thrived on the understanding that imagination was not escaped from reality, but the force that created it. Children on distant worlds learned that every story they told, every hero they imagined, and every act of courage they witnessed made the universe a little more resistant to the forces that sought to unmake it not in the end. Humanity had given the galaxy something more valuable than technology or weapons. They had shared the secret that conscious beings could write their own destinies through the simple act of believing that heroes existed and that good could triumph over the darkness. Between stars,